Hey everyone, my name is Pat, and I want to welcome you to my webinar on system utilizers. This webinar focuses on the impact and development of system utilizers through the perspective of social disorganization theory, as well as two approaches in combating a system utilizer's cycling behaviors and reducing criminal recidivism. A considerable percentage of those behind bars experience complex mental health and substance abuse issues, alongside socioeconomic disadvantages, causing an individual to cycle through the criminal justice institution, shelters, and hospitals. These are what we call system utilizers. And the system utilizers put a massive cost burden on society in the manner of psychiatric treatment, emergency services, incarceration, criminal justice supervision, and public shelter stays. If we define having a mental illness as an individual experiencing symptoms or receiving mental health treatment, then we're looking at approximately 56% of state prison inmates and 64% of jail inmates with a mental illness. Now, if we take this definition, focus and narrow it down only to include serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder, major depressive, these are diagnoses that are accompanied by psychosis, mania, major depression. Then you're looking at about 25% of prison inmates and 10 to 20% of jail inmates who have a serious mental illness.
So you might be thinking, that's a lot of numbers, Pat. How do we incarcerate so many people with mental illnesses?
Well, we need to look at what started the normalization of mass incarcerating them. So here we have deinstitutionalization. Committed persons with mental illnesses in state run institutions peaked in the 1950s. Soon thereafter, there was a rapid decrease in those committed in insane asylums as those with mental illnesses were released to federally funded community health centers. The rapid and mass release in the 1960s set the pace for deinstitutionalization. Deinstitutionalization occurred from two major developments: the advancement of psychopharmaceuticals, specifically Thorazine, and the community psychiatric movement. Thorazine was introduced in 1954 as the first effective antipsychotic drug. What this means is that patients with psychotic episodes were treated quickly and could be released back to the community more rapidly. The second development was the community psychiatry movement. The community psychiatry movement occurred between 1955 to 1970. It was inspired by the practice of World War II psychiatrists. During World War II, psychiatrists believed the most effective method of managing combat fatigue was quick treatment and a rapid return to duty. The community psychiatry movement applied the same concept of rapid reintegration domestically with an emphasis on strengthening pre existing social structures. The push for community based outpatient services was boosted by JFK's Community Mental Health Centers Act in 1963. Notice a frequently used term in the development and concepts of deinstitutionalization, a concept that later on will come to bite us. Due to these developments, deinstitutionalization set its rapid pace through the 1960s and deprived the mentally ill of stable environments and forced many to seek shelter in the only place they could find: the streets. During this time, America is experiencing legislative and social shifts, like the growing autonomy for those with mental illnesses and the general response to the growing drug culture. Drug culture dominated the 1960s, and society began to reject treatment based approaches to the war on drugs. Due to this, we see the development of criminalizing mental illness. Deinstitutionalization is occurring during a significant time in America's criminal justice and social history. Those with mental illnesses are essentially being released at massive and rapid rates into a growing drug use culture to which they are vulnerable and to which communities were not prepared for. And with the rejection of treatment based services and increased homelessness, those with mental illnesses are utilizing emergency services or funneled into criminal justice institutions. Criminal justice institutions are not the only ones experiencing the consequences of the mass and rapid rates of release.
But hospital psychiatric units and emergency rooms begin to bear the impact caused by deinstitutionalization. While indigent persons can receive treatment for mental illnesses in emergency rooms and psychiatric units, these are short term solutions. Emergency visits are not designed for long term supervised care that some with mental illnesses need for successful mental health management. But this occurred over half a century ago, so how does that affect us now? Well, there's much to consider, like the normalization of criminalizing mental illness, the current stigmatization of having a mental illness, as well as being an ex offender. There's serious socioeconomic and health issues that we need to address if we're going to reduce recidivism, especially for frequent system utilizers. Social disorganization theory postulates that decreased economic position and housing instability influence the weakening of community ties that are necessary for crime control. This is significant to remember because with the community psychiatric movement, there's a push for outpatient services and to strengthening social structures. But when we're looking into socially disorganized neighborhoods, essentially with the weakening ties, there's a lack of networking and a lack of services. So, this in turn affects those who are mentally ill, especially those who were previously incarcerated. Those with mental illnesses need community networks to succeed. Socially organized communities have an advantage in creating successful systems of informal social control due to communication deriving from stronger community bonds. Socially disorganized communities can prevent the bonds formation, which in turn limits the neighborhood's ability to control and monitor behaviors and subsequently adds to an increase in crime. Take in mind that crime is not always defined as an act of violence, but typically for those with mental illnesses, charges are substance or public nuisance related.
Despite the prevalence of serious mental disorders among jail inmates is somewhere between 3 and 6 times that than in the general population, mental health services in jails is particularly scarce, subsequently breaking an individual's continuity of care. Typically, those with comorbidity or those that have mental illness and substance abuse disorders have worse expectations than those with uncomplicated illnesses. Comorbidity is associated with higher degrees of psychotic symptoms, depression, suicidality, and lower functioning, as well as having higher rates of noncompliance, treatment relapse, and rehospitalization. Inmates with comorbidity may be systemically excluded from treatment programs within correctional institutions. These inmates then experience an interruption in care continuity, subsequently creating barriers to re engagement in post release treatment. Considering that those with mental illnesses are disproportionately relying on Social Security and disability for treatment, during incarceration, benefits are discontinued and the process of reinstatement after release is not automatic. Additionally, navigating through the bureaucracy of obtaining benefits may exceed an individual with a serious mental illness's capabilities. This, in turn, leads to a loss of medical benefits and an extended break in care continuity. Even with benefits, the availability of inpatient and outpatient programs equipped to address the forensic population following release is insufficient, as many existing programs are unwilling to serve correctional populations or those recently released. Frequently, prisoners are alienated by their families and communities. This is particularly true of the mentally ill who are often estranged from families due to psychiatric disturbances. In addition, they face the permeating effects of the stigmatization of mental illness along with incarceration. Unemployment is disproportionately found in the incarcerated mentally ill population. At the time of arrest or conviction, 39% of state prisoners, 38% of federal prisoners, and 47% of jailed mentally ill are unemployed. These rates exceed those found in non mentally ill prisoners. Research consistently identifies homelessness as a correlate of incarceration for the mentally ill. A Bureau of Justice statistics study uncovered that those with mental illnesses have nearly twice the rate of homelessness than those without. Individuals with mental illnesses are often labeled as hard to house or hard to serve, as the complexity of their situations require multi agency resources and approaches. Those with comorbidities are typically generally more challenging with housing support services and more likely to be non compliant with long term treatment plans.
So essentially, what we're witnessing is ex offenders are being released without any prospects of housing or treatment. So after leaving jail, they might go to a shelter or end up on the streets. While they're on the streets, they might not have access to water, so they don't take their medications, or without access to their benefits, they're unable to get their medications. They might become rehospitalized and then they're released again, go back to the shelter. The same thing happens. They end up homeless because their disruptive behaviors, due to lack of medication, causes police intervention. They end up in prison. And then the cycle continues on to where each place just offers short term solutions.
There's little accountability across agencies and domains for providing housing to those recently released. This leaves vulnerable individuals homeless and in need of treatment during reentry. Homelessness after release increases recidivism, especially for those with a serious mental illness. Correlation between homelessness and incarceration is also moderated by mental health and substance abuse variables. Now, two ways to combat this cycle is to reform discharge planning in our correctional system and employing the housing first approach. Discharge planning is essential to ensuring care continuity on release from incarceration. However, a survey of jail services by Stedman and VC discovered that discharge services were available to only 20% of discharged inmates with mental illnesses. The development of outpatient services for the forensic community will require treatment directed towards comorbidities. Outside treatment details, a greater challenge is engaging released inmates in treatment. Simply scheduling outpatient visits will more than likely be unsuccessful. Correctional and outpatient providers need to work together in creating individualized plans designed to provide viable solutions pursuing care continuity and compliance. Similar communication must exist with housing and community affairs agencies to implement a housing first approach. The housing first approach is an evidence based method influenced by Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If we are to expect significant advancement in treatment, programs and policies designed to improve results for those incarcerated with mental illnesses must consider housing, preferably before the onset of treatment for other issues. Compared to individuals served through traditional housing ready approaches, interventions employing housing first model display abatements in the use of emergency health services, days in jail, and substance abuse, while experiencing a general enhancement in the quality of living. Discharge planning requires the collaboration of housing agencies, outpatient treatment, and criminal justice institutions. By eliminating system parallelism during the discharge planning, providing programs specifically designed for the forensic population with mental illnesses, and implementing evidence based methods addressing socioeconomic disadvantages, can society make further improvements in serving an underserved population? Thank you.